Hey everybody, tonight we're diving into a story of incredible riches, devastating poverty, and enough political drama to make House of Cards look like a preschool play. Buckle up because we're going to Venezuela. Now, Venezuela wasn't always synonymous with economic meltdown. Once upon a time, this South American nation was the envy of Latin America. Imagine pristine beaches, lush rainforests, and a booming economy fueled by, you guessed it, oil. We're talking mountains of the black stuff, enough to make them the richest country in the region. They had it all. But as we all know sometimes, having it all can go very, very wrong. Fast forward to today, and Venezuela is a cautionary tale of how quickly prosperity can crumble. What the hell happened? Well, grab a snack, settle in, and let's unpack this dumpster fire, shall we? To understand Venezuela's downfall, we need to rewind a bit. In 1999, a charismatic, fiery leader named Hugo Chavez took power. A former military officer who had previously attempted a coup, Chavez promised to redistribute the country's oil wealth and uplift the poor. He called it 21st century socialism, a Bolivarian revolution named after Simon Bolivar, the liberator of Latin America. Chavez was a rock star, especially among the working class. He poured billions into social programs, built homes for the poor, and even provided free health care. For a while, things seemed to be looking up. Poverty rates dropped and literacy rates soared. Venezuelan historian. But like a bad Tinder date, things went south pretty quickly. Chavez, it turned out, wasn't so great at the whole managing an economy thing. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't you say Venezuela had mountains of oil? How do you screw that up? And you'd be right to ask. See, Venezuela was sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. They were practically swimming in black gold. During the oil boom of the 2000s, when prices were sky high, Venezuela was raking in cash. But instead of saving for a rainy day, like a responsible adult with a 401k, they went on a spending spree. Think Dubai on steroids. Fancy new infrastructure projects, generous social programs, even subsidized gasoline that was practically cheaper than water. But here's the thing about oil. It's a fickle mistress. When prices are high, you're the life of the party. But when they drop, you're the one passed out in the corner wearing a lampshade and wondering where it all went wrong. Okay, so we've established that Venezuela had a bit of a spending problem and a serious case of oil dependency. But that's not the whole story. Remember that corruption we talked about earlier? Yeah, that played a starring role in this economic horror show. Under Chavez and Maduro, Venezuela became a kleptocracy, which is a fancy way of saying a country ruled by thieves. Government officials treated the national treasury like their own personal piggy bank, siphoning off billions of dollars while the average Venezuelan struggled to put food on the table. Meanwhile, the government's mismanagement of the state-owned oil company, PDVSA, turned what should have been a cash cow into a dying steer. Lack of investment, nepotism, and outright incompetence sent oil production plummeting. Remember those mountains of oil? They were starting to look more like molehills. Section 5. Echoes of Empire, the long shadow of foreign intervention. Now, before we go any further, I want to be clear. Venezuela's problems are largely self-inflicted. But that doesn't mean outside forces haven't played a role in this mess. Because, as we all know, the United States has a long and storied history of meddling in Latin American affairs, and Venezuela is no exception. From supporting a coup against Chavez in 2002 to imposing crippling economic sanctions, the U.S. has been a constant thorn in Venezuela's side. Now, some argue that these actions were justified, aimed at promoting democracy and human rights. Others see them as blatant attempts at regime change designed to protect U.S. economic interests in the region. And then there's the curious case of Russia and China. Eager to stick it to the U.S. and secure access to Venezuela's oil reserves, these global players have become key allies of the Maduro regime. Section 6, The Price of Paradise. Personal stories of hardship and hope. Behind all the economic jargon and political analysis, it's easy to forget that there are real people caught in the middle of this crisis.
People like Maria, a single mother who used to be a teacher but now scavenges for food to feed her children. Or Carlos, a doctor who fled because he couldn't afford basic medical supplies. These are the human faces of Venezuela's collapse.
Stories of unimaginable hardship, of families torn apart, of dreams shattered by hyperinflation and scarcity. But amidst the despair, there are also glimmers of hope. Ordinary Venezuelans exhibit extraordinary resilience, sharing what little they have and protesting for a better future. These stories remind us that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure. Section 7. Beyond the barrel. Could this happen in Brazil? Now you might be thinking, okay John, that's all very sad and everything, but I live in insert country here. What does this have to do with me? And that's a fair question. But the truth is, Venezuela's collapse is a cautionary tale for any country overly reliant on a single resource, especially one as volatile as oil.
Take Brazil, for example. Like Venezuela, Brazil is blessed with abundant natural resources, including vast oil reserves. And like Venezuela, Brazil has experienced periods of economic boom and bust, often tied to the whims of the global commodities market.
Now, Brazil is not Venezuela. It has a more diversified economy, stronger democratic institutions, and a less interventionist history with the United States. But the parallels are there, and they should serve as a wake-up call for any country tempted to put all its eggs in one basket. The lesson here is simple. Economic diversification is key. Section 8. A house divided, internal conflicts, and the erosion of democracy. But Venezuela's problems run deeper than just economic mismanagement and oil dependency. At the heart of this crisis lies a profound political and social divide that has polarized the nation and eroded its democratic institutions. Chávez's brand of Bolivarian revolution was built on a foundation of populism and class warfare. He skillfully exploited existing social divisions, pitting the poor against the rich, the people against the oligarchy. While his social programs initially garnered widespread support, they also sowed the seeds of resentment and division. Over time, Chávez and his successor Maduro consolidated power by gradually dismantling checks and balances, silencing dissent, and undermining independent institutions. This erosion of democracy created a climate of fear and impunity, allowing corruption to flourish and human rights abuses to proliferate. Section 9. The world is watching, international response, and the moral imperative. Venezuela's crisis is not just a domestic issue, it's a regional and global concern. The mass exodus of Venezuelans fleeing hunger and persecution has strained the resources of neighboring countries and sparked a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented proportions. The international community has responded with a mixture of condemnation, sanctions, and humanitarian aid. The US, Canada, the European Union, and several Latin American countries have imposed sanctions on the Maduro regime, targeting individuals and entities involved in corruption, human rights abuses, and undermining democracy.
However, the effectiveness of these sanctions is debatable. Critics argue that they disproportionately harm ordinary Venezuelans while having little impact on the ruling elite. Beyond sanctions, the international community has a moral obligation to provide humanitarian assistance to the Venezuelan people.
Section 10. Picking up the pieces. A glimmer of hope for the future. So, where does Venezuela go from here? The path ahead is uncertain and fraught with challenges. The country is mired in a deep economic and political crisis with no easy solutions in sight. But amidst the despair, there are glimmers of hope. The Venezuelan people have shown incredible resilience and a steadfast commitment to democracy. Despite facing unimaginable hardship, they continue to raise their voices, demanding change and a better future for themselves and their children. The international community, while divided on how to best address the crisis, has a shared interest in seeing a peaceful and democratic resolution. Continued pressure on the Maduro regime to respect human rights, release political prisoners, and allow for free and fair elections is crucial. Ultimately, the fate of Venezuela rests in the hands of its own people. Section 11. Lessons from the brink. What Venezuela teaches us about prosperity and its perils. Venezuela's fall from grace reminds us that prosperity is fragile. It highlights the dangers of resource dependency and corruption. The lessons from Venezuela extend far beyond its borders. They serve as a cautionary tale for all nations. Economic progress must be inclusive and sustainable. Venezuela's story is a tragedy, but it is not yet over. The Venezuelan people have endured unimaginable suffering. Their resilience and hope offer a beacon of light. The world is watching, waiting, and hoping for Venezuela's recovery.